Hi, welcome to a quick demo showcasing the capabilities of the Integration Advisor, which is a component of the BTP Integration Suite. In today's demo, I'm going to show how you can use the Integration Advisor to accelerate the EDI interfaces on your implementation. So before we get into the demonstration, let's just quickly level set on the capability itself. So the Integration Advisor is one of several capabilities that exist within the BTP or the Business Technology Platform Integration Suite, and it reduces the complexity and accelerates implementation of EDI interfaces by essentially two fronts. One, it provides a graphical representation of the document or the documents that are coming from your partner. So as we'll see, these EDI documents are often segment-based, delimited by characters such as asterisks or tildes. So graphically representing that file and allowing you to map to the SAP APIs or vice versa, taking an SAP API response and mapping it into the EDI format. The second component here is that there's an artificial intelligence built in to the Integration Advisor, whereas the more and more customers that map specific integrations or that use certain libraries, they get put into a repository anonymously. And then when you go into the Integration Advisor to map your own integrations, you can generate proposals based on what other customers have done to even further accelerate the implementation of your integration. Now, what I will say with the Integration Advisor, the one thing to keep in mind is this is a design time tool, meaning you generate artifacts like style sheet transformations or XSLT or schema definition documents, XSD. Those artifacts get used in integration flows or iFlows at runtime. So with the Integration Advisor, there's only really a quote unquote development tenant for Integration Advisor that's required. You don't productively run the Integration Advisor, so to say, meaning there's not a production runtime for Integration Advisor. This is a tooling to help you develop integrations that get used at runtime. There's another capability that we're not going to look at that's very relevant for EDI, and that's the trading partner management. TPM does work in conjunction with the Integration Advisor to onboard your partners for EDI. So this facilitates you can reuse the artifacts that you're generating with the Integration Advisor and speed up trading partner onboarding. And two of them work in tandem with the cloud integration runtime, as we're going to see here in the demo. So you generate the artifacts using the Integration Advisor. You can set up your trading partner profiles and agreements using trading partner management. And then everything gets executed at runtime in the cloud integration capability of the Integration Suite. So let's go ahead and jump into the demo. So the first thing that I'm going to do is, this is the BTP Integration Suite. And one thing that you'll notice is now, based on my roles, we do have a harmonized UI, meaning all of the capabilities of the Integration Suite are available within one user interface. So if I look here under Design, I have Integrations, which is where I would build and deploy my integration flows, which we'll see here shortly. B2B is where we manage trading partners, so for the TPM scenario we just discussed. But we're going to look at the Integration Advisor capability. So the first is, from an integration scenario perspective, we have really two concepts within the Integration Advisor. The first is a message implementation guideline, and the message implementation guidelines get used in the subsequent mapping. So for example, a message implementation guideline, in our scenario, we're going to use an EDI 850 document and post it to an SAP sales order SOAP-based API. So if we look at the new MIG, creation of a new MIG, here are all of the system types that I can create from. So of course, we have SAP APIs like SOAP and OData. So all of the OData APIs from S4 are loaded. Even IDOCs are here. But for EDI, we have X12, EDIFACT, some automotive capabilities. CXML is here for procurement. So if I look at the X12, and like I said, we're mapping an 850 document. So if I just search for 850, so here is the 850 purchase order X12. So I can click this, and then I just select my version. So if we wanted to look at what version we have, this is a sample EDI file that we would receive from a partner. So oftentimes you already know what the EDI file is going to look like because the partner has samples to send to you. But the version of the file is actually found here in the ISA, or the initial segment of the file. So I would just select what version I'm using. And then if I wanted to, I could provide a sample XML. I'm not going to do that. And then you provide a name and the direction of the integration, and then click Create. I've already created the file, so if I look here, this is the source file. So again, this is what an EDI file looks like. And if you've done EDI development, you know that you often start with a routing guide. So this is what the partner gives its customers for the 850. So this has detail in terms of what all of the segments mean, and more importantly in this scenario, which segments are required or will be passed, as well as what data is in those segments. So the whole goal of this mapping exercise for the integration is to take the data in this file and map it to a sales order payload that ultimately gets sent to SAP. So things like, for example, in this N1 segment, we can find shipped to, sold to. This PO1 segment indicates a line item of the order. So here you can see 10 eaches at this price of this material. So the first step in the sequence now is to really select or enable which segments you are going to use that are coming from the external partner. So this is already set up and mapped for the purposes of the demo, but here you can see I've enabled all of the segments I expect. If this was an initial file, I mentioned about the artificial intelligence capability. Up here is this Get Proposals button. If I click on Get Proposals, it now reaches out to the repository and it generates a mapping proposal for me based on what other customers have done. So here you can see the proposal successfully calculated 30 best fitting MIGs. So here I have a proposal generation with a level of confidence. So 93% of the customers use the beginning segment of the purchase order. And then, of course, as I scroll down the file, I can see different levels of confidence in terms of, what other customers have done. So once I've generated the EDI 850 for the inbound purchase order, I do the same thing and I create a new message implementation guideline for a sales order. So and I've already done this, I'm just going to look for the SAP sales order. So here's the sales order, and here I'm using the SAP API. So this is the API that's found on the Business Accelerator Hub. This is an inbound SOAP API. And just like we did for the EDI 850 file, we enable which fields we want to use and classify or qualify the nodes in terms of which segments will contain sold to and shipped to, and indicate that. So just staying on the message implementation guideline topic for a second, you can also, in the event that the library does not exist, you can create your own message implementation guidelines. So for example, here we can see we created a sample MIG, or not a sample MIG, but a MIG to use for master recipe where a library type did not exist in the integration advisor, but we were able to take the schema definition document, or the XSD, and then quickly create our own MIG and then select and enable those fields just like we did and we just saw for the delivered libraries as well. Moving to the mapping guideline. So once you have your two MIGs created, the next step is to map the source to the target, and that's done via these mapping guidelines. So if we look at our sample mapping guideline, we want to map the EDI 850 into the SAP sales order. So here you can see source and target MIGs. You select which MIGs you want to use. And then once you do that, again, there is a proposal icon or proposal button. If other customers have done similar mappings, it'll generate proposals for you. But this is the beauty of this is a graphical representation of this file, right? So now you can drag and drop the fields from the left onto the right. You can set constants. So for example, these fields at the header level of the sales order are always true. So we just set them to true or 0, 1. You can write XSLT code as well to transform the data. So you can map the data again just from left to right, transform dates. So you can see source date format here, target date format there. So there is a lot you can do here. When your mapping is complete, the next step is to use these in your cloud integration runtime or your iFlow. So there's a capability that I don't have configured right now in this ICA tenant, but you can actually just inject these style sheets and schema definition documents right into an iFlow from the integration advisor. But I'm just going to export them to show you what the export is. So we're going to export, and the zip file that gets exported has all of the source files, target files, as well as the mapping XSLT file. So the zip is being generated. We're just going to open it up now. So within this zip file, if I look, I can see several files. The first is at the root level. We have the EDI 850 sales order.xsl, which is the mapping from source to target. But then under source, here are the ASCX 12850 validation XSD. We have some pre-validation files as well that we'll see where they're used. And then likewise on the target side, we have some pre-processing and post-processing transformation, as well as the schema definition document for it, as well as some test data that can be used in cloud integration. Within the integration advisor, it also does generate a very robust documentation set in terms of either PDF or Excel, which is very handy to have for interface documentation and auditing perspective or auditors. So now we've generated, or we've created our MIGs, we've done the mapping. So we've taken hopefully what is the inbound 850 and moved the data into sales order. So now let's look at how we would use that in the iFlow. So coming back to the integration suite, before we look at the actual iFlow, what I would point out is just like in a lot of other areas of BTP, there is a lot of value in leveraging all of the predefined content that is available for you to use on your implementation, and EDI is no exception. So here's an EDI integration template for Integration Advisor. So this is a package that includes sample iFlows, and you can see for inbound, and here's ours, EDI to SAP SOAP, integration flow template for building inbound EDI based on these, ASCX12, which is us, Edifact, etc., to SAP SOAP. And within this package are all of the delivered integrations. So here we can see EDI to SAP SOAP inbound. And this is a sample template iFlow that highlights and outlines and sets up the basic structure of the integration for you in terms of, what files will need to be placed where. And using this package is as simple as clicking the copy and bringing it down to your local tenant. I'm going to move to the design view, which is where the iFlow development happens. And we're going to look at the iFlow that I've developed. So If I look at the EDI 850 inbound sales order to S4 iFlow, the base structure is going to look very similar to what we just looked at from the delivered template. So typically, from an integration perspective, this sender channel would trigger the iFlow start. So this could be, maybe the partner's calling via HTTPS and sending the file, or it's very common for this to be the SFTP adapter reaching out to a VAN or the partner directly to pull in new EDI files. For the purposes of the demo today, I've hard-coded the EDI file that we've looked at into this first content modifier to simulate, since I don't have an SFTP server available to me. So from an iFlow structure now, I've just extended it a little bit with some best practice items in terms of setting up some properties. So here you can see from a configuration perspective, I've set some properties around sender business system, organization, division, distribution channel, sales org. I've done this so that these remain configurable, so that you don't have to hard code and re-export any artifacts or change the iFlow directly. You can simply set these parameters via the iFlow. So I've set up and called for those properties around the initial content modifier, and then we have an initial validation step. And with cloud integration, you can actually trigger the 997 acknowledgement step just by essentially enabling the checkbox on the initial router, so you don't have to handle any EDI mapping for the 997. And then it is a matter of taking the files we just looked at in the zip that were generated and placing them into the proper steps. So here is the EDI to XML converter. So we're going to validate the schema. The pre-processing step, which to be honest is optional, but I've left in here, so this does an additional data validation on the incoming payload. Extended validation, and then we have EDI to SOAP mapping. So here is where we have that XSL file that is going to translate the 850 into the SAP SOAP API. Now, before we actually call SAP S4 over here to create the sales order, I've embedded a custom process call. So this process call down here, and it's blank at this point for the purposes of this demo. But the nice thing here is you could add in any data enrichment calls that you needed for the integration. So for example, if you wanted to reach out to S4 to check for product availability, or maybe you wanted to call a lookup table to pull in sales order header data, such as based on the sold to, go out and fetch the organization division, sales org, purchasing group, things like that. You can make a call to S4 or any other system here, and then remap the data. So what I've done is just set up the inbound XML that's coming, which is the mapped sales order at this point, and then you can just remap everything left to right, and then replace the fields that you want. So here remember at the beginning I showed the content modifier with those properties. Now I'm reading in those properties for sales org, distribution channel, organization division, so that they are more dynamically set and not hard-coded. So after this mapping step, now the call goes back to, or the handling goes back to the main process, and the call is made to SAP. Now this is an asynchronous API, which means the payload is submitted and S4 just sends back an acknowledgement, and HTTP 200 that says, yep, we have received your payload. So the actual notification comes back on a different call. So to handle that, what I've done is I've just created a very simple integration for the purposes of this demo with an inbound endpoint, an inbound SOAP sender channel that does nothing more than log the sales order API. So typically in this integration flow, you would want to check the XML coming back from S4. You could use simple Groovy code or even just straight XPath expressions to check the payload for any error messages or warnings, and then trigger maybe an email or create an alert based on the data that's coming in. So, for example, I worked with a customer that logged all of these sales orders into a local data store and then sent a nightly report indicating, all of the sales orders that were created as well as any of them that failed. So I went ahead and deployed the integration. So now I'm going to move into S4HANA. So this is the S4HANA cloud system. Before we take a look at the logs, I'm just going to show the API setup. So I am using, as I mentioned, the asynchronous sales order API. So if we look at this communication arrangement, so here's the username that I'm using. This is the URL that I called from Cloud Integration. And then from an outbound perspective, I created that second iFlow that we just looked at. So for the purposes of the demo, I'm using the send processing notification, which it sends the entire created sales order payload back to the endpoint that I used on the integration suite. You could set it up, this confirm processing one just sends the sales order number and reference number back, and you can also just have it only send error logs. So now if we go into the message monitor, so there's several different views available. There's a more of an inbox looking view based on component. I've chosen this SAP message monitoring for administrators. So here I'm just going to find the particular component that I'm using. Now, an end user typically wouldn't see all of this, but I have all of the permissions available to me. So I see all the components. So I'm just going to look at the sales order queue. And here I'll pull up all messages, and I should have one from today. So today is September 21st. So this is the sales order that was just created. It does have a series of warnings because the credit limit's exceeded, but the sales order 375781 has been saved. So this was the sales order that I just created from Cloud Integration, and it is now in SAP. Likewise, if we go over to the monitoring view, and before we do that, I'm actually going to show one more thing, which is frequently asked, and it's around monitoring, and it's the ability to trace and debug. So I'm going to put the original integration that we looked at into debug mode. So if I come under monitoring, and before we look at the result that we just saw in S4, I'm going to set this integration to trace mode so I can show some of the tracing capabilities as well. So I'm going to redeploy this integration, so inbound sales order, and I'm going to deploy it. And now if I come back to the monitoring in the integration suite, this iFlow executed in trace mode. So this will give you a good idea of what is happening through the integration if you did need to debug anything. So now I get a graphical representation with the messages moving along. So if I look at this particular step, so I'm early in my integration execution, and I would see the EDI payload, right? And then after the EDI to XML converter step, now I have an XML representation of that EDI file. Here is the EDI to SOAP mapping. So if I look here, now I have the SAP map for the sales order. And then remember, I created that custom process to map in the additional data. So now after the custom mapping step, I have the sales organization data that I was reading from those configurable properties, and then ultimately the call to SAP. If we look at the confirmation that comes back from SAP, here is the very simple logging step. So this is the SAP sales order, and again I set up the notification, which is the entire sales order. So I'm just going to move this into Notepad to make it a little more readable. But this is now the sales order in SAP. So if I look here, the sales order number is here, sender and receiver systems, and then all of the data that I just created for this sales order. So it was a 2-line sales order to create basically, or to purchase 2 bikes. But this sales order is now in SAP. So if I wanted to, I could actually go to the Manage Sales Order app as well and look. So if I come over to Manage Sales Orders, and then I can search for this specific sales order. So this was the sales order that we just created based on that last deployment. So here I have the sales order that we created from that 850 file, and you can see the credit limit is way over. But again, it's the 2 line items which match exactly what we sent in our 850 file. So again, I hope that this demonstration was useful, showing the capabilities of the Integration Advisor and how you can use them to accelerate your EDI interfaces, and that would get used in tandem with the trading partner management to onboard partners. And then ultimately, these artifacts are used in the cloud integration runtime as iFlow, or in iFlows, to perform the execution. Thank you.